Hello, everybody. Welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I am Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and today I have the great privilege of being here with one of my dearest friends in the whole world, Pam Jenoff, the General, which we'll talk about. Pam, my love, welcome back to The Blaze.
Mwah, mwah. I miss you. This is great.
We miss you too. We're so glad that we managed to pull you back in. So we're going to be talking about Pam and her accomplishments and her new book, Last Twilight in Paris, momentarily. But first, I want to welcome everybody to A Mighty Blaze. If you are a repeat blazer, welcome back. Thank you for bringing your light to the blaze. And if you are new here, welcome to The Blaze. We are a team of creative professional volunteers that started linking authors with their audiences in the age of COVID. Remember them olden days, the pandemic? And we have gone well beyond COVID now. We are on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, which I refuse to call X, and we are on TikTok. And if you like what you see here, please give us a like or a follow. Please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.amightyblaze.com so you'll never have literary FOMO ever again. No more FOMO, and nobody likes that. And now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my dear friend. In case you have not heard of Pam Jenoff because you have been living under a rock, I will read her bio. Pam, are you ready for your bio?
I'm ready.
Okay. It's from your website, so no scary surprises here, although I have the tea on Pam, so you guys can ask any questions you want. I will spill it all within a minute. So you may all know Pam as the best-selling author of 14 historical novels, and she is a multi-New York Times bestseller. I'm so proud of you. But did you know that Pam is an attorney who has worked at the Pentagon and the State Department, including at the consulate in Krakow, Poland, where she developed her expertise on Jewish-Polish relations, it's hard to say, and the Holocaust. Pam now teaches law at Rutgers when she's not writing best-selling novels, one a year and being out on tour, which she is now. And Pam is, as I mentioned, the New York Times bestseller of Codename Sapphire, The Woman with the Blue Star, The Lost Girls of Paris, The Orphan's Tale, The Commandant's Girl, The Diplomat's Wife, The Ambassador's Daughter, Last Summer at Chelsea Beach, Winter Guest, The Things We Cherished, Almost Home, The Hidden Affair, and Last Twilight in Paris, which we are here to talk about today. She also authored short stories in the anthology Grand Central, original post-war stories of love and reunion, which we were in together, and this is how we became sort of sorority sisters of the book, and the Blaze collection for Amazon Original Stories. And Pam, when she's not touring, right now she's in St. Louis, lives in Philly, outside Philly actually, with her husband, 3 kids, 2 of whom are twins, dog, 2 cats, a lizard, and a bird, which we were talking about in the green room, because I was like, do you not have enough to do? Now you have a lizard and a bird. Like, how did that even happen?
And a rabbit, but my husband takes care of everyone except the Labrador.
Oh, yeah, we both have our labs.
They're like the same age, our Labradors.
Yes, they are. And we have like long-standing plans to get our dogs together so that they can romp around like crazy beings on a beach, which I am like dying to do. I am determined to come see you this year once you're sitting.
The dog beach is life. Please come. It's amazing.
I will. Dog beach is life. It's amazing. And yes, fly, Eagles, fly, as Renee said. I know you are a big Eagles fan. I know this is a big weekend for you. I'm told there is a sport ball event this weekend of some sort. So, and there are some Eagles involved in it. So go Eagles. Go. I'm going to vote for the Eagles just for you. I mean, root for them. Root. Good. Okay. All right. Let's talk about Last Twilight in Paris. You're currently on tour with this. Why is my screen backwards? Tell us about the book. Give us a plot thumbnail, if you would.
So this book has been out for 3 days, so I have not spoken about it that much. My elevator pitch is maybe not so ready. And so in this book, we begin with a woman named Louise in 1953 Britain. She lives in Henley, which is a town outside London if you're kind of going toward the west, toward Oxford. And Louise is a wife and a mum, as they say in Britain. And she is trying to adjust to that role because during the war, she did great things. She was a Red Cross volunteer and she took packages to POWs and she had some extraordinary experiences. And now she's just trying to fit back into life. And I am fascinated by the notion that people go off and do these great things and or tragic things or extraordinary things, and they come back and they're a different shape and they're trying to fit into kind of the same space. And so Louise is trying to do this, and she's working in a thrift shop, a secondhand shop. And one day in a box, she finds a necklace. And Jenna, have you ever heard of a Mizpah? Have you ever heard of
I
that?
had not before I had the pleasure of reading the book, but I recognized the necklace from when I was a kid. I had like a charm bracelet that was something like was described in the book. Go.
Yes. So when I've been describing it to people on the road this week, no one knows the word Mizpah, but everyone, when I describe it, goes, "Oh yeah." And it's because the necklace is either a circle with a heart on it or it's heart shaped. And it's one of those necklaces that breaks into two pieces. And so one person can wear one half and one person can wear the other half. And that's a Mizpah. And it usually has a biblical expression on it. It says, "The Lord watch over thee and me when we are apart from each other." And so what might happen is a soldier might wear one half and his beloved might wear the other half to kind of keep them connected when they're apart. So Louise finds half of a Mizpah in this thrift shop box, and it only has the words "watch" and "me" from the inscription on it. And she knows not just that she has seen a Mizpah before, but she has seen this Mizpah before. Because when she went over to Europe with the Red Cross, she traveled with a woman named Franny. Franny was a stage performer going to perform at one of the camps. And if that sounds far-fetched, please ask me about that later, because it has grounding in history.
Yeah.
And Franny was found deceased outside one of the POW camps, very tragically. Hours before she was found, Louise saw one of the POWs hand her this Mizpah charm, and then Franny was found dead. And so Louise in 1953 very much believes that if she can find the origin of this necklace, she can find the truth about Franny's death. And her search leads her to a former department store in Paris. How's that?
That was great. Okay, good. And then there is also another story braided in with the Louise and Franny story. And I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit without giving away any spoilers.
Yeah.
I know that's a tall order.
I'd love to. And in order to talk about that story, there's two women in the book, Louise and Helene. And Helene is a woman who lives in Paris. She's a young woman. And she had a tragic childhood illness that basically her parents kept her inside for her whole childhood out of concern for her safety and that she was fragile. And finally, at about 18, Helene says, "That is it. I'm going out in the world." And she does go out in the world, and she falls in love with a musician named Gabriel, who her affluent parents deem is wholly unsuited to her. And so Helene elopes with Gabriel, and they start this amazing life together right as the war comes on and crashes down and destroys everything for them. So I don't want to go on too long, but Helene finds herself arrested, and she's actually imprisoned in a Paris department store. And this is the true nugget that inspired this book, because during World War II, the Germans took over a large store in Paris. It was actually a furniture store, and they took it over. And they imprisoned Jews. They had to live on the fourth floor of the store, and the prisoners were forced to sort and sell the plunder that had been taken from Jewish homes. And this was such a shocking detail of history to me that when I read it, I knew I was going to write a book around it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a great place for my jumping off question, the next question, which is, tell us about the gasp. Because I know when you're researching your books, you look for something that's called the gasp, and the gasp becomes the story. So I wanted to ask if the department store, if Levitan, right? Am I pronouncing this right?
I believe so. My French is my French is non-existent. So yes, I believe
I only know my French from like imitating my agent, who if she's watching is just like, stop trying to use a French accent. But was Levitan the department store the gasp moment for you?
It was the gasp. I mean, sometimes there's more than one gasp, but let's call that the main gasp. And so the main gasp. When I am looking for a book idea, I always say that I'm looking for the gasp and the questions. That's sort of how I know that I'm on to the right idea. Because although I lived in Poland for a number of years, and I lived among the survivors, and I learned their stories, they trusted me, I don't write their stories. Rather, my books are love songs to those people. And so for the actual story, I'm going and looking for the inspiration. And if I can find a piece of history that is so fresh and untold that after more than a quarter century of working with the war, it makes me gasp, I'm hopeful that I'm onto something about which readers will feel the same way. So yes, in this case, it was learning this notion that there was a store in the middle of Paris, a grand multi-floor terrace store where the Jewish goods rolled up on French moving trucks to the back, and people were imprisoned inside and forced not just to sort it, but to actually sell the plunder in the store on display to the Germans.
It sounds like a relatively glamorous place to spend the war, but it isn't really, is it? And I'm wondering if you can talk about maybe the real conditions in the department store that inspired the story and that we can extrapolate is in LAST TWILIGHT in Paris.
Certainly. So there were actually 3 locations like this around Paris, if you can believe it. This was probably the biggest. And then there were 2 other locations that served similar functions. And the people who lived there, their lives were sort of filled with contradictions. So they were absolutely prisoners of the Reich. They, they had no liberty. They were kept in a department store which had no showers or baths, no washing facilities. They had no kitchen. The food had to be brought in, and they had to work these back-breaking shifts for 12 plus hours a day. Under these very horrifying conditions. But because they were in the middle of Paris and they were not in a remote camp, they had some anomalies. So the people in the camp could do things like get a pass to leave for a doctor's appointment or have a visitor. And it was this odd contradiction. And so I think the people who were there wanted to stay there because it was better than what the alternative. It was better than where they would go if they were taken from the store. So what you find is that nobody wanted to be found to be sick or unfit or violating the rules because they didn't want to be sent out to a much harsher camp and an even worse fate. So it was horrible. But I think afterward, the people who had been in there expressed some contradiction, right? Because they had been victims, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. It's a little bit like I talked to Kristen Hanna about her book, The Women, which is the nurses during the Vietnam War, which was such a fascinating look into an unknown piece of history, which is the same kind of book you write. And the women who came back didn't feel like equal to the task of talking about the war, and then nobody believed them. So if you were a survivor and said, I spent the war in a department store, people would be like, doing what? Spraying people with perfume? But in fact, imagine not being able to bathe, for 5-6 years and losing all of your liberty and having this backbreaking labor and living in constant fear of being ill and being sent east, which was the sort of euphemism for the Polish death camps, right? Like everybody was terrified to be
Yes. And it was also super strange that this department store, it's right in the middle of Paris. So you have people across the street who might be able to see the roof terrace. You have, they blacked out the windows, but it was very central, very central in the city.
Mm-hmm. Which is almost an extra cruelty to be so close and yet so far, to be able to see civilization. There's a pharmacy across the street from the department store in the novel. And the pharmacist can see some of the prisoners coming out for smoke breaks, right? So even though she's not supposed to.
Yes, and the moving trucks, they were French moving companies that would roll up to the back dock with all of the belongings to be sorted. So it was not. I don't think it was a well-kept secret, is my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. Yeah. And so one of the things that you're most beloved for in your fiction is taking your flashlight, like the great searchlight of your intelligence, and shining it into all of these hidden corners of this vast, vast history of the Holocaust. And I know that you're always looking for your next gasp. I'm wondering where you do your research. Like, where did you find out about the store? Do you dedicate an hour of your day to just going through old documents? You're like the Indiana Jones of Holocaust archaeology in some ways. Like, how do you do this?
It's really hard, and it's almost more daunting than the writing, right? Because after this number of books, even though every book is hard, I sort of know that I'm going to work through my process and I will reach the end. And so there's a little bit, but you always have this moment where you're like, what if there are no more gasps? Like, what if I don't find that gasp that's going to resonate with me, that's going to resonate with readers, and that I can write about? To that question, it goes no further. And so I could spend months just trying to find that idea. And I wish I could tell you where. I mean, thankfully there's a million online archives now, not a million, but there's many, right? So you can go to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum, the National Archives has a lot of interesting material, the Library of Congress, the Wiesenthal Center, all of the different museums and places have so many online resources now that are always a starting point. And you get that little bit and you're like, that's interesting. And then you start looking around and maybe Googling. I will sometimes go into a bookstore and just kind of stand there in front of that wall of historical nonfiction, of historical books and just see. I've had ideas come to me by going across to the university library at Rutgers where I teach and pulling a book off a shelf. I've had some really serendipitous moments there too.
This is kind of going off the reservation of my own questions, but do you ever get depressed? Because you're, combing through historical archives of a very, very dark time. Does it ever just seem overwhelming?
It always seems overwhelming. So there's a couple moments in my writing career that really stand out. One was when I was working on my first book, Commandant's Girl, I saw Band of Brothers, which I think is the finest thing ever put on film. And there was this moment when they liberate a camp. And it was so shocking and so overwhelming and so well done that I thought, like, who am I to be writing in this era? I had that moment of imposter syndrome, which I just, I can't do this. And then another one was when I wrote The Orphan's Tale. And there's this horrible, true piece of inspiration about a boxcar full of unknown children, babies who were taken from their parents too young to know their own names. And I knew that was going to be the opening scene of my book. And to write it, I would have to metaphorically put my own children on that train. And so normally I am a very business-like person about writing. I do it and I go to the next part of my day, but there are some really hard moments.
How do you get through those?
Well, I mean, if I stop, I think that I say they've won, but I don't know who they are, right? The people who don't want this illuminated. I think, the people who did the things in history, the bad things, they don't want this illuminated. And so what I always remind myself, and this is kind of a core for me, is that history is not made up of great battles and wars. It's actually an infinite number of individual people making decisions. And so I'm looking for that. I'm looking for the circumstance where that person had to make a decision. And that's what I keep coming back to.
I would say that they are the bad people, and also people who are Holocaust deniers or people who don't want that history to be told. And I know that you do so much traveling and so much touring for your book. Full disclosure, you guys, I said early on that Pam and I were in the same anthology called Grand Central, which is historical fiction as well, where all the stories are set in Grand Central Station on the same day in 1945 when America is coming home from the war. But we got to tour together for that, and we've sometimes crossed paths on other books. Like, I was doing The Lost Family, and you were writing The Lost Girls in Paris. We were like, we're the lost authors. Like, we're out here just kind of lost, but now we're in Dallas. Yay, we're found. A lot of our paths take us to big Jewish functions and fundraisers and Hadassah and audiences. And what kind of feedback have you gotten from your readers about the sort of illumination your work brings?
So, I've been, I always say that, engaged Jewish readers are one of the core sort of groups who read my book, but certainly not exclusively engaged readers, whether male or female, and regardless of your background. But I've toured with the Jewish Book Council for like more years than anybody. I am their Borscht Belt performer, right? Like I go on the circuit and I love them. But the thing about those events and those places are, it's not just a Jewish audience. It is a Jewish audience, but there's so many other people who come together. And I have been so lucky. April 8th of this year will be 20 years since I got the offer for my first book, Commandant's Girl. I remember it was a Friday. And so the things that have grown over these years, right, are that the readers who have become friends and the friends who have become family. And we were so blessed to set up this infrastructure years before COVID that Blaze was able, and other groups and other authors were able to sort of bring together. It's just a very special community.
It's true. Have you ever heard from, I know there is this great feeling of being beholden to history when you're writing historical fiction. Do you ever hear from survivors who say, oh my gosh, this is my story and nobody's ever told it, or you got this just right? Or what is the feedback been from survivors, survivor families?
Oh, I think, and as with you, when you've written this era as well, they know that we approach it with a certain ethos and a certain commitment to the truth and to telling their stories lovingly and respectfully. And I think when that comes across, even if people don't always agree with your creative choices, I think they understand and they welcome the material. And two moments that particularly stand out to me, when I wrote The Orphan's Tale, which features a German circus that sheltered Jews, I heard from a woman who said my aunt was the circus performer who inspired your book. And I really wished she had the aunt had died a couple years ago, but I really wished that I'd had the chance to talk to her. And then when I wrote Codename Sapphire, which is inspired by the true story of a rescue of Jews from a train headed to Auschwitz. So when some young people broke into the train and freed the prisoners, I actually heard from two sisters in California who said our parents were on that train. And so that was also a very special moment.
That's so gratifying. Do you get like goosebumps at those moments? Like what is your reaction?
Right. Like I'm just writing fiction, but they are the real deal on this. So it's very
Mhm.
awe-inspiring.
Sometimes I feel like when I'm writing fiction, you spend so much time in the kind of movie theater in your own head. And then when you do have these moments of intersection between your imagination and real life, even if you know you're writing from research, it somehow feels like a God wink in ways, right? You're like, oh, this actually did happen. And it just is so inspiring, I think.
Or when the themes come out after you've written the book. Like I'm not someone who sits there and goes, I am going to write a book that talks about refuge and sanctuary, but then all of a sudden this theme will come out when it's very much at the forefront in the world. After one of my books, the theme became what trust do we place in our government? And that became a very timely theme. And so it's not that I ever think of these things ahead of time, but they come organically sort of through the process. And that's very gratifying.
Mm-hmm. We have like so many admiring comments coming in from the audience, which is great and totally expected. What is the theme of Last Twilight in Paris? You have to say off the top of your head.
So I haven't spent enough time talking about this book with people to cogently think it through. But one of the themes that's really important to me in all my books, and certainly in this one, is that I love to write about. I've written about some men, but I love to write about women because if you think about a woman in history, she would have lived on a very certain path, and through war or catastrophe, she's thrown off that path and she's tested and she's challenged. And I love seeing how she responds. And also, I love seeing when she crosses paths with another woman who, through normal circumstances, she never would have met. Like Louise wouldn't have met Franny or, any of this. And we see these women from different backgrounds transcend their differences and come together to help one another. And this is a message I love, especially today, because we are living in a world right now of such otherness and division, regardless of your point of view or where you stand, that I just believe if we can read about people transcending differences, it will help us ourselves, if we empathize with them, it helps us to reduce some of the division in our current lives. So to me, that's the most important.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ears. It would be nice if we could all remember a common humanity. That would be very helpful right now. Speaking about the two women in the book, so we have two stories that are woven together. Louise is from 1953, so about 8-9 years after the war, and she is, forced to, or she chooses to, I should say, but she's forced by her own emotional sort of crucible to go back to Paris and do some detective work. And then Helene, who is imprisoned in the department store. One of the things I was so struck by as the reader while I was enjoying reading the book was Louise is British. And your British vernacular was like spot on. I thought, I will not attempt a British accent now because something really bad will happen and it will sound like Brooklyn. But I just thought it was amazing. So how did you, as far as I know, you're not secretly British. How did you write her so authentically?
I'm not secretly British, and I can't even fake a British accent. Like I can't do accents at all. Like you do the French accent. I can't do any accents. But I did. I went to Cambridge, so I lived in England for 2 years, and so if I can kind of put myself back in that place. And last year I had a magical experience. I was able to take a bucket list trip with my mom and take her back to London and Cambridge, and we took the kids, and because she had never been able to go there when I was a student, so I got to take her and I got to just be there with her, and was super magical. And I love it over there. I'm going to digress for a second because some cities around here could be a little down at heels right now, but London was like a shiny penny. And it was just such a special experience to go there. And part of my heart, it just feels really natural to me. So hopefully, I don't know if British readers would agree that I got it right, but hopefully they feel that I did it justice.
I did, although I'm also not secretly British, but I was married to a British guy for many years. And so I was reading with that in mind. See, you guys didn't know that, did you? This is why you tune into The Blaze.
I didn't know that.
Seriously?
I know, right?
Right. Okay. Well, it was a starter marriage. So that's probably why I hadn't talked about it. But anyway, it was fine. It was very amicable, great guy, great British guy, friends on Facebook. Everybody can go look at my friends now, try to figure out who he is. But I did think the British voice was captured so authentically. And I also love the sort of commentary on post-traumatic stress disorder that Louise's character presents. And I'm wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, sure. So Louise had her own traumatic experience when volunteering with the Red Cross, but her husband is a veteran and he was in years of combat. And although he came out unscathed, he lost many, 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 many friends and fellow soldiers, fellow officers or enlisted men. He lost a lot of people. And so they both have this traumatic experience from the war that they can't fully share with each other. And it wasn't a time when we probably use the phrase PTSD or we'd say, go get some help or, the many things that we can say today. And so her husband is wrestling with the ghosts of the war and she has her own difficult questions from the war. And it almost tears them apart. And when she decides, it's kind of at the breaking point. So when she decides to go find out the truth about this necklace and about Franny, it's this moment where she kind of has to do something differently. And hopefully through that solving of the mystery and the journey, she can come back to her husband together again, and they can be together in kind of a more honest place.
I was really struck by the role of the Red Cross during the war, bringing care packages to some of the prisoners behind enemy lines. And then like how perilous that was for the Red Cross workers. So that taught me something I didn't know, in addition to the fact that people were imprisoned in a department store in Paris. That was two things that I didn't know before I started reading the book. What was the most surprising piece of research that came up in the sort of research magic 8-ball for you?
Well, so, other than the department store, and then I started researching the Red Cross, and that's not the most surprising. I promise I'll answer in a second. But the Red Cross was very interesting because, you have these were British prisoners of war. And there was this conflict between, like, if we are sending over the packages, does it prolong the war? Does it interfere with military operations? And then Dunkirk happened. And there were actually a lot of, people who were kind of in government or high in society who had children or relatives who were prisoners of war. So it became more of a thing. And it was actually very difficult to figure out the logistics of sending the packages over and the routes they took. I had to take some liberties with that part of the story. But what was very clear is the Red Cross had this role where they wanted to help people. They were constrained by what the Germans did or did not allow them to do. And they saw things, and a lot of the world thinks that, rightfully so, that they should have said more sooner about things they saw. But they were in this role of like, are we observers? Are we helpers? What are we doing? So it's a very checkered and complex history, which I will not pass judgment on in this moment. But what's the most interesting piece of history to me is I said in the beginning that her friend Franny was a stage performer and she went over to perform. And you're thinking, what? This is inspired by the true story of Edith Piaf, the French singer, who was invited by the German officers to come perform for them. And many thought she was a collaborator because she did. And she said, I will only come perform with the officers if I can perform for the POWs. And so she was in the POW camps taking photographs with the prisoners, and there was unsubstantiated reports that they used those photographs to create fake identification so some people could escape. So this was a really interesting history to me, and I wanted to bring it in with Franny in a way that was like novel but very very understandable and plausible to do. So that was the most interesting.
It was interesting. It reminded me of an intersection between the USO singers who would go and perform for American troops. But I didn't know that people had gone to perform for the German troops. And the Red Cross, yes, like, were they Switzerland? Were they resistance? Were they medics? It reminded me a little bit, that aspect of Last Twilight in Paris, of our friends Jane Healy and Luis Alberto-Uria, who wrote about the donut dollies, like the women who were in the donut trucks, the Red Cross, who had every bit as much of trauma as the men did coming home from the war, but then were completely overlooked in terms of treating that trauma. I know we have a ton of audience questions as well as comments, and I should say thank you again, you guys, all of you, for being here today to celebrate Pam's new book. One of the questions I want to ask before I let anybody else take the mic is, as I've mentioned, the book has two storylines. There's Louise's storyline, kind of reflecting back on her time during the war as a Red Cross volunteer, and then there's Helene's story of surviving the war in the department store. This book is structured like a thriller. I mean, it is amazing. Like, speaking of gasps, I had reader gasp toward the end when there's a moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's right. You did plant that seed and now it's coming to fruition and I see how you put the pieces together. Can you walk us through your process of writing the book? Like, I think you're a pantser, right? You're not a plotter. You're not an outliner.
I'm a pantser. So do your lasers know what plotters and pantsers are? So plotters, right, are those dear souls who write everything in chronological order with an out. Are you a plotter?
Oh yes, I'm container store brain. I don't do anything without an outline.
Oh my goodness. Our good friend Allison Richmond, I know she's a plotter too. Allie's a plotter. So I am not a plotter. I'm a pantser, and I write by the seat of my pants, and I go blah, and I throw all of these words at the screen for months. So I don't have a lot of structure or intent, but I have a lot of discovery. I'm going to tell you a caveat. When I wrote The Woman with the Blue Star 2 books ago, I turned in a total clunker of a first draft. And my editor, Erica, who we both know, said, no. And I was like, no? Like, what do you mean no? I've written 11 books. How can you say no? And it was a terrible book. And so I had to rewrite 95% of that book in 5 months. And since I never want to do that again, I do a slight outline at the beginning now. So I plot a little bit. But I don't know when or where the twists come up for me, right? So I have an opening scene, very cinematic, and I kind of know the very end in fuzziness. And then in between, there's that big dark middle. And I think that it's almost like a suspension bridge, right? If you're lucky, you have 1 or 2 high moments that'll kind of help you get across the middle. But I never know, like, it's all done at the same time. You know, it all starts at the same time and it's all done at the same time.
That just is like an astonishing act of bravery to me with my very organized container store brain. And I should say, for those of you out there who are interested in the process, when I say I write from an outline, I absolutely do. And I have very granular outlines, but I have probably, if I went into my study, I could show you, I have like 20 outlines for my new book. Like, they change and change and change and change. So it's not as though I've constrained myself in some way. It's just, I can't set out on a journey without a map. Like, I feel like you're like setting out not only on a journey, but on a high wire journey without a map. And I just admire it so much. But then the books come together in this very ingeniously plotted way. So, like, when does that happen? Is this just because you're a genius? Like, this is how
I'm not, and I'm not even really, like, I'm not good at putting together mysteries. Like, I'm not, that logic flow doesn't happen for me. But I was just thinking, when you were saying you need a map, I was thinking of Kermit and Fozzie saying we don't need a map to keep this show on the road. So that's me. So anyhow, no, I just, at some point the words that flow out for like 4 months get super unwieldy. And then I have to start with charts and chapters and outlines. But the aha moments come through the pantsing. They come when you're like, oh my gosh. And then I have to go back and make them work and give it structure. So I have heard it said that the plotters build scaffolding, but the pantsers, it's like an archaeological dig. So you're like picking something up and dusting it off and seeing what's in there. And that's definitely my process. I don't love it because it's really hard to edit the pantsing. It's like a whole, like, if I say to you, I have 40,000 words, that's not 40,000 good words, just 40,000 words of junk. And so it's difficult, but there's the aha moments that come out of that are just completely worth it to me.
Yeah, it's 40,000 words of clay that you then get to mold. I think we're all plotters and pantsers at heart in a way, because I plot everything. I write the first draft. I know it's a maddeningly inefficient process, because for all my plotting and all my drafting and all my whatever, like, I know I'm going to throw out the first draft, the second draft, the third draft. Somewhere in the fourth draft, I have my own aha moments, right? Then plug them in. And those are immensely satisfying and also kind of embarrassing, because I'm like, why didn't I see this in the first draft? This is going to make it so much better. What is wrong with me? So we all have that sort of symbiotic flow. Do you write chronologically? Like, when you're alternating chapters here between Louise and Helene, are you just starting A to Z? And I'm sorry, I'm like talking at you while you're trying to.
No, I just needed a little drink. So no, I write nothing chronologically. Like all these words come out and then I'll figure out who's saying them, like Helene or Louise. It's completely random. But what you do learn when you decide who your point of view characters are, at least for me, right? Because sometimes it's one or two or three. It's one of those like threshold questions, is you then have to look at the end when you get this draft, you have to look at the balance between the chapters, right? Because it's not like a 1 2 1 2. Sometimes it's like 1 1 2 1, depending who needs to be speaking then and who needs to tell the story. And then you have to like line it up and ladder it to make sure that the two stories reveal information at the right parts with one another. It's like one of those logic puzzles.
It is like a puzzle. I was thinking about the word puzzle when I was reading your book, because the way the information is revealed and kind of cards are doled out onto the table is very thriller-like, where the reader knows more than the characters know, but then part of the joy is in A, discovering new things ourselves, but B, like seeing how the characters put the information together and hopefully find each other and find their answers. And it's very mathematical, I think, the way I saw it. And I'm working on a thriller now, and it's the same thing. It's like every single word has to be doled out in a certain way to make everything make sense. So in the end, hopefully it makes sense anyway. Who really knows? But I just found it fascinating. You guys are going to love this. If you love your thrillers, you're also going to love Last Twilight in Paris. I would say it's like a historical thriller. So, okay, we have 1,000 questions. I'm going to let you guys ask questions. I want to ask one no, I have 2 questions, actually. I lied. And the first is, are you still doing the process where you throw a chapter a day at Erica, your editor, who we both love, at 5 in the morning? Like you're the 5 in the morning club. You write a chapter every day. This is why we call her the General.
So I definitely do not write a chapter every day. I'm not sure I ever did. So let me back up. I used to write a book a year, but I've gotten older. The books have gotten harder. And I just, I don't enjoy that pace. So I write about a book every other year right now. Like I do every 2 years, which I love. I love that, not just creatively, but commercially, because it takes so much to launch a book. And I don't want to ask that of my village every year. I'd rather step back and pay it forward and have it be more of an event. So I have slowed down, but that's usually during the revision process or when we're under a deadline. And I wouldn't throw a chapter at her. I'd throw a question or two at her, because even though I had written a draft and she had seen it, there comes a point with deadlines, I don't know about you, where I feel like I don't have time to go wrong again. Like I don't have time to do this wrong and rewrite it. And so oftentimes if I'm like, I could do A or I could do B, I will certainly ask for her very insightful opinion. And so I'm always like the 4 or 5 in the morning, I'm going to send her an email. I've gotten better. I don't send them on weekends anymore, but I send her like 4 or 5 in the morning, and then, she responds, and there's like this colloquy that goes on.
I love that. I also love the word colloquy. Like, you win. But do you love how I just made up this description of your writing process? That you're like, you write a chapter.
It was perfect. I'm like, I wish you. The reason the General started, right, was I had this thing where I did 100 days of writing a long time ago, where I was going to make sure I wrote every day for 100 days. And so I am even if I'm glacial now, like I still really thrive on the consistency of writing like regularly. And so I think that's where we started when you started calling me the General like X years ago. I think
I did. We were on tour for Grand Central, and I remember this is how we were doing this. You guys, we were in New York launching this anthology at Grand Central Station in period costume. We, ganged up on Pam, like put lipstick on her, put her hair in pin curls. The rest of us were like, look, we have period costume from ModCloth. And we're like, you're going to do it too. We were like mean sorority girls. And Pam got up early in this hotel. This is how I remember it. You can correct me, but I remember you like running up and down the stairwells to stay in shape, and then like writing a chapter because you wrote every day. And meanwhile, I was like, but my hair though, I'm on tour. I can't do this. I'm on tour. So I just felt like such a slacker. And I had so much and have so much admiration for how much you balance and how much you handle. So I started calling Pam the General with like great love.
It's my proudest moniker. I love it. Now I will say the exercise, I have to give credit to our friend Karen White. She was like the exercise person on that tour, and there was no gym in our hotel. So she had me going up and down the back stairs for exercise. And I still sign my messages to her instead of yours truly. I sign it squats and lunges because, from that time.
That is so cute. So if you're a general, she is like the commander in chief, I guess. And she was very like that. She was great fun.
Surgeon General. She
The Search
is.
in general. We need to do another anthology just so we can all tour together because it was like ridiculous amounts of fun.
It was very special.
Yeah, we all actually loved each other. It could have gone so wrong, and yet it didn't. Okay, I have one more sort of serious question, then I will hand the mic over to our readers who are like, Jenna, stop talking. The question is, because you are a Holocaust scholar and a Holocaust expert and just well versed in this time period, I'm just going to read a line from the book that gave me a chill. It was like super early on, actually. I'm going to ask like what sort of parallels you're seeing, and I'm sure everybody's asking you this question, between this time period when fascism is very much on the rise and what we're living in now. And the line that gave me goosebumps, I put the book down for a few minutes, was, she had done nothing wrong. They had to free her. But even as she thought this, Helene knew that the old world of being a French citizen with rights was long gone. And those of you who know me as a person as well as a blazer know that I am a fairly outspoken activist, and I fear, and I also write about the Holocaust, and I fear the time period that we are in now. So I'm wondering what parallels you see and what message you and your book might have for us in these very, very troubling times.
Well, as you know, these times are so stark for many, many reasons that it could actually paralyze us and stop us from writing. So I want to say really honestly that on October 7th of 2023, I was in a car being driven up to Morristown Festival of the Book as the events in Israel unfolded and the attacks were happening. And I was going through this moment. And afterwards, I had this kind of, I wasn't writing, and I was like, how can we talk about books? Like, how can we do this in light of everything that's going on in the world? And then, of course, the message is we must talk about books. And it's more important than ever that we go forward and talk about literature and the things that matter. So, it's a whole conversation, but I lived in Poland 30 years ago. And although I had a safe and free and peaceful life there were things that would throw me back in time, like an old world siren or a crowd gathering. And it made me want to run into my basement and hide. And the reason I tell you this is because at heart, I'm not a brave person. And I wonder during the war, what would I have done? If I was an ordinary person, would I have stood up? Would I have hidden? And I don't know the answer to that. But these are questions that everyone, regardless of your point of view, must ask themselves today, is not just what would I have done, but what will I do now? And so I want people to think about the individual roles that have such an impact on history when they read these books and realize the importance of their own words and choices.
That's a beautiful thing to say. I have the same question. I don't do well with torture or pain. I'm not good at that. So I don't know how brave I would be if I needed to stand up for somebody else or for principle, although I would try. But I remember being at a Jewish book council reading years ago when I was touring with Those Who Save Us, and somebody saying, "Hey, do you think fascism could ever happen here?" And I'm like, of course. It's not confined to Nazi Germany. Of course it can. People are people are people are people. And then the woman said, "Well, what should we do about that?" And I said, I don't know. I'm a writer. I'm not a philosopher. I have no idea. But I said, I think you should do whatever you can do. And whatever you feel compelled to do by your conscience, but whatever small or big thing you can do, you should do that thing. So thank you for that answer. I think it's sort of an unescapable question when you're reading this book. Okay, Karen, can you please put up some questions?
So the question is, who was the hardest character to flesh out this time? Ooh, that's a really good question. I feel that when I have characters, I relate to them all on different levels. And so Louise was very accessible to me because I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a person who has lived in other circumstances and then tried to come back. And so I really felt her emotional journey on a very personal level. And so I think the harder one to understand was probably Helene, because Helene had this she was very cloistered in her childhood because she'd had a serious illness. And right when she got her freedom and she found a happy life, the war happened and she found herself imprisoned again, which was the very hardest thing for someone who had just found freedom. So I probably would have a harder time putting myself in Helene's shoes, but I think both journeys were equally gratifying.
I'm so sorry, you guys. I have
I
an
sent you, I sent you my cough. I'm sorry.
You did. I know. It's like came right through the screen. I think I have an allergic response to fascism. So coughing, but also I had a cold. Pam, how do I get a signed copy of your new book? Thank you, Renee. Great question.
So this is actually an amazing question. So let me say, I signed more copies of this book than any book I've ever signed. I signed like 20,000 copies, and I'm not even making that up. So there are actually signed copies independent bookstores, although you should call them and make sure you have stock. There are signed copies of the beautiful Barnes and Noble edition. But if you would like a personalized signed copy, what I would do is I would call my independent bookstore where I live in Haddonfield, New Jersey, and you tell them exactly what you wanted to say in the book. And someday on the way home from the grocery store, when I get back from tour, I will go in the store and I will personalize and sign your book, and the folks at Inkwood will send it to you. And they will do that for any of my books.
And I know that our wonderful Karen will put the information for Inkwood in the chat. So you guys can all go to that link and order your signed copy of Last Twilight in Paris. Fantastic. Okay, Karen, do we have another question from our audience? Considering that Pam Jenoff is a very experienced writer, how reliant are you on Erica? Is Erica watching? We don't know.
I am so reliant on Erica. So, I am, first of all, I don't turn in these wonderful finished drafts. Like, we have friends who turn in such perfect manuscripts that their editor is like, my work is done. But that's not me, because I feel like writing is almost like I don't cook. I have not cooked dinner since the first Obama administration. But I feel like that writing is like cooking, in that at some point I need someone else to taste it, be like, too much salt, not enough salt. So I get to a point when it's done, not done. And then I give it to her. So it's done, but I know it's going to come back so many times. With first round, usually big structural changes, and many more rounds, and it gets increasingly granular. Erica and my agent Susan, they both give me feedback at every round, and then I fix it and I turn it back. And it can take months. I build months and months in to get that editorial support. The other place I need a lot of support is the historical accuracy and the copy editing piece, because, I can make mistake upon mistake upon mistake. And so a lot of readers go into trying to weed those out.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the rounds of copy editing that books go through, you guys, is astonishing, and it always feels to me like such an honor. Does it feel that way to you?
It is, but it also, you want the hard round, because if I get, it very seldom happens, but if you get a glossed over round and then you're still finding mistakes, there are times that we've put it back in for an extra copy edit just to be, or a proofread just to be safe, because I make a lot of mistakes.
Oh, that's really interesting. First of all, I don't believe that you make a lot of mistakes, but I also think that every author makes mistakes. And even when the book has been copy edited, fact checked, proofread again, and again, we go through first, second, third pass pages. I read all my books aloud before they go out into the world to try to catch everything. You'll never catch everything. And the things you don't catch, the readers will catch for you on Amazon.
And say loudly.
And tell you where you made a mistake, and you have to be like, mea culpa, you're totally right. You are right.
Yes, I have one in every book. Do you remember when Game of Thrones accidentally left a water bottle in the scene? That's what I feel like about mistakes in books, in historical fiction.
I love it. You know what? It's actually a very Amish approach. Did you guys know that the Amish actually encode a mistake into their quilts on purpose to show that they are imperfect and only God is perfect? And so when my readers write to me and say, hey, you have Frank Sinatra singing in this scene and he wasn't even born yet, or whatever, the song wasn't out yet, I'm like, is that true? But I'm like, I'm Amish. That's why. I'm not actually.
I meant to do that.
I meant to do that just to see if you guys are paying attention. Okay, we had a great question come up in our chat about a movie. I'm wondering if Karen can pop that up. I heard Lost Girls in Paris is being made into a movie. Do you have any update, and do you have any input on the film, or is it out of your hands? Great question, Melissa. Thank you.
Oh, this is going to be a painful question. So I had, for years, I would have said, when people asked about movies, from your mouth to God's ears, because nothing had happened. And then things started happening right before COVID very swiftly with Lost Girls of Paris, despite the writer's strike and all the things that were going on in Hollywood. And we reached a point last year, I wasn't allowed to talk about it then, but now I can, where we had director, producer, we had the most amazing screenwriter ever who worked on Wicked. Like, she's really, really good. And this genius team, and I got to sit in on, pitches and practice pitches and slide decks, and it went nowhere. So a historical fiction is not a big thing in film, I'm told right now. And so I hope that it will come back around. But for right now, I can honestly say all rights still available.
So anybody out there who knows Spielberg, the rights are available, just FYI. I think historical fiction, from what I'm told, is a tough ask in Hollywood because they have to create the backdrop for it. But I'm like, come on, we have CGI. Don't be lazy, you guys. Look at this fantastic book waiting to be made into a film. Who would you cast for Last Twilight in Paris? Do you know?
I have not thought about it yet, right? So, you know, and there's always like some older character in my book, and I think they're older than I'm like, oh wait, they're my age, you know? So,
right,
you know,
I know,
right? So I don't know for this one. Years ago, I'm a Bradley Cooper fan, like Lisa Scottolini, and I always wanted to shoehorn him into a book, but it didn't really work out. So I don't know. Send me your casting suggestions, please.
Yes, everybody go to Pam's website, send her your casting suggestions, or you can put them in the chat. But if you haven't had the pleasure of reading the book yet, when you have done, please send her your suggestions. My favorite thing, the casting game. I think Bradley Cooper could be Ian in this book. Don't you think so?
Oh, that would work. We got to see if he can do a British accent.
Yeah, it doesn't even matter. I mean, it's Bradley Cooper. We'll find a way to fit him into every one of your books so that when you get into films or series, Bradley can be in it. And he'll be like the common denominator. Is your book tour set, and where can we find the schedule? Great question, Renee. Thank you.
Yes, I am on book tour right now. I am in a hotel room in St. Louis, hence the background. So my full tour is on my website, pamjenoff.com, or I'm posting on social media. It's there too. But I have a graphic with all the stops. The short answer is after St. Louis, I have 3 nights of events in the Baltimore, Washington area. Then I have Philadelphia, North Jersey, North Carolina, and South Carolina lined up, and then Central New Jersey next month. So that's where I'm headed right now, but I'm in St. Louis tonight.
Amazing. Thank you so much for making the time for this, by the way. I know, like, when you're in a hotel and you have events going on, it's really hard, at least for me, who is not the general, to concentrate on these things, because I'd be like, but my hair. So,
please, when this book was coming out, I wrote to you like 8 times. Can I come back to the Blaze, please?
And I thought I had responded about 8,000 times, and apparently it was only in my head. But I'm so delighted to drag you back here, guys. We have to let Pam go. It's almost been an hour, but Pam, before we do you have one thing you'd like to say to your readers, or anything you'd like to say to your readers?
I would like to say thank you, and I would like to say to please find me online, because I really value the long relationship with readers, not just like the every few years I have a new book, but the ongoing dialogue. So email, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you are hanging out. I really don't post about much except books and my dog Scoop. So
and you guys, it's worth the price of admission just to see the posts about Scoop and about the books, of course, and libraries. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today to talk about one of our favorite authors and her brand new book, Last Twilight in Paris, which is not mirrored on my screen, but you get the point. Go out and buy at least 50 copies of it. Distribute it widely. Sharon, we would love to get Pam to Minnesota. I want to get her back to Boston, even though she was just here. Pam, safe travels. We love you. Happy reading, everybody.